part 2.
So this morning we worked with seeing the loving essence and heart-centered listening, really skills that provide an incredible gateway to the experience of your own essential nature and also to the experience of your own innate well-being.
So for this session, we're going to start with a question, because remember we said that there's the experience, but it's very good if when you start, you have some kind of a sense of what the territory is, so that when you go into it, you say, oh, that's what they were talking about. That's what they were talking about. So the question is, how can knowing about the soul line, assist you not only with your spiritual awakening, but also with improving your sense of well-being? That's a good question. And to answer it, we need to take a closer look at where is all of this work going on in consciousness. And so we consider ourselves very fortunate in that since we come out of a psychological background, that's what we're trained in, we kind of grew up with that in a way in terms of our spiritual maturity. So we could say, oh, I see, this happens there, and this happens there. So we had kind of a head start going into the game. So let's take a look at consciousness itself, what it's comprised of, and how it functions here on the goal line and on the soul line, so you have a sense of where we're going and why we're going there. So we'll start out with what we refer to as the 5-line model. Again, this is just by way of a description, so you have a sense of what we're talking about. So at the most surface level, there is physical world reality, which is pretty much the same as the goal line. So this is the line that we're all operating on. We have lunch, we go to bed, we have meetings, we have jobs. All of that is on physical world reality. But if you start to go inside, you start to plumb into the depths of consciousness, the first level that you come in contact with is the level of the mind, the mental level. It's all of your thoughts about things. It's all of your ideas about things, all of your beliefs about what's going on in the world. All of that is mental level stuff. So, and people are beginning to catch on to this, and the way we see that show up, there's so much more going on these days in this whole area of mindfulness, and rightfully so. So we just know that's a very important level, and we'll be working with that a little bit in this session. But if you go deeper inside, less obvious is the whole area of the emotions. So you have how we feel about things. Something happens and we have a feeling. We don't stop and sit there and say, well, let's see, do I like that? No, I don't. Oh, I don't feel good about that. It's automatic. So you notice that we have that sense of polarity. We talked about that. And when you hear scientists or psychologists talk about the ego, what they are talking about are both of those levels, the mind and the emotions. That's what an ego is. That's what your ego is. It's all your thoughts about things and the feelings that are associated with them. And you have that sense of polarity, and there's an alignment. So nobody thinks or believes that they have a terrible job and they look forward to going to work in the morning with a lot of feeling, oh, great, I'm going to work in the morning to this terrible job. It doesn't work that way. So if you believe you have a great job, that's how you're going to feel going to work in the morning. So there's this alignment. It's very important to understand that. Now, if you go deeper in consciousness, you come into this realm called the unconscious. We don't do a lot of trying to access people into their unconscious and Personally, I would really not recommend doing so. Here's why. Material is in the unconscious for a good reason. Really. It's in the unconscious for a good reason. It simply means you're not ready yet to become aware of it. When people are become ready because they've moved up a certain degree on the soul line, that material will bubble up into awareness. How many people have had the experience where all of a sudden you have a realization, oh, wow, I never thought that before. How many people have had that? It's an example of something, it bubbles up. So we don't have to go there. I've seen a lot of not so happy stuff when people try to plumb down into that. We don't recommend it. So you'll notice there's another level. So if you go deeper, you come up or you find yourself at another level. This is the level of what we refer to as the authentic self. The authentic self. Now you'll notice at the authentic self level, there is no duality. There is no duality. Well, what's there? There's only one thing that's there, and that thing is unconditional love. You just are in a sense of well-being. I'm in a place of love. Does that mean that no matter what happens out there, you would stay in that set? Yep, pretty much of the time. These are the people who we recognize as the great mystics who wrote about this kind of stuff. There are various different forms or experiences that you will have in that authentic self. Here are some of them. Peace, acceptance, compassion, beauty, joy, freedom, gratitude, humor, happiness. If you were to experience all of those, would you not say you were in a sense of well-being? Of course. Of course. So if you really are interested in well-being in the deepest sense that we know, then the road to the authentic self is that road up the soul line. From our perspective, that's what everybody is doing here on this planet. They're remembering. They're waking up into their essential nature. So with this as our backdrop, we're going to move into the mental realm for this session. And then in the third one, we're going to show you how to work with the bridging action that takes you down into the authentic self level. But knowing about how the mind works and how it functions in this system is very important, because believe it or not, the mind is the easiest level to work with. Why? Because it's the only one that we really have dominion over. You get to choose what you think. You don't get to choose your feelings. You know, if I said to you, feel happy right now, I'm not sure how to do that. You know, or if I said to you, I want to change your behavior. Well, yeah, we can work at that one, but I'm not probably going to give up drinking just right when you tell me that. I mean, it takes time. But the mind, you can change your mind like that. That's what we're going to take a look at here this afternoon. So our very first graduation speaker at USM was a woman named Marilyn Ferguson, who some of you may remember. She wrote a great book called The Aquarian Conspiracy, way back. And she was giving the talk and she said, I'm a graduate of MSU. Of course, my mind is going to say, Michigan State. You know, I go through all of my MSUs. And she says, that stands for making stuff up. And I thought, that is probably the best definition of the mind that I have ever heard. Making stuff up. We make stuff up, and then we pretend it's real. We make stuff up, and we base our lives on it. So we're going to take a look at that process here in this work that we're going to do. And if you really think about it, the things we make up in our mind are really the things about the way we think things either are or should be. According to what? Well, according to me. I am obviously in charge of this creation, and I think it should be that way. And of course, reality doesn't seem to work that way, especially when you find somebody else who has a different belief system. So let's take a look at how this operates. So let's go here. David Hawkins, who I highly recommend, his Power versus Force book is, to me a fantastic book, although you have to wade to get through it a little bit. The ones after that are better, but you need the first one to get the context. He said, perception is edited observation. Perception is edited observation. So you see something, and then David Hawkins talked about it I think he said in a 10,000th of a second. I don't know, to me that's a pretty quick time. 10,000th of a second. So you see something and immediately the mind decides, is it good, is it bad, is it right, is it wrong, is it, and then off we go on that track. Who does the editing? Your ego does the editing. See, your authentic self doesn't edit, it just sees what is. The ego does the editing. It decides. Based on what? Based largely upon your personal beliefs, what you believe to be true. And, if we look around the world, are we not seeing wars and all kinds of stuff going on based upon this idea of what your personal beliefs are? And when you band together with thousands or millions of other people who have the same personal beliefs, and we meet up with another group whose beliefs are different from ours, if they're too different, war is likely the result. Nothing new, it's been going on throughout human history. It's really not a measure of anything other than we're still a relatively young species in terms of spiritual evolution. So the fourth thing is, therefore, what you believe determines what you'll perceive and your experience. And that'll happen both emotionally and physically. Because, see, your emotions are derivative of what you believe. And then what you believe is what you're going to create in reality. Now, most of us have heard that before. I can tell you experientially it's true. 36 years, we found it, this is the way it works. So, if you believe you'll have a great job, you're going to feel great going to work in the morning. So, let's take a look at how we work with this and how we're going to work with it in the trio that we're going to do here. So, we start out with judging. What's another word for judging? Wrong-making. So we start out with things happen. That's what happens. That is really the best definition of reality you will ever find. That is what's happening. Then immediately the mind takes it and divides it into the polarity. It'll either go right or wrong. The perceptual filter is in place. All right, how do I do away with my perceptual filter? I think I'll stop doing that. Good luck. It's a process. It's a process. If you divide something into the right category, you're going to have an emotional reaction in accordance with that. And you'll say, I am happy because this thing happened. And if it's in the wrong or bad category, you're going to have an emotional reaction that says, I am upset because this happened. So what we do is we form the habit of blaming our emotional states on outside events, which is the justification for why we feel the way that we do. We'll talk more about that in a little while. I'm sure everybody can relate to that. Either way, the action that you're going to take is going to be very biased. Very biased. It'll be very restricted. It'll be not too terribly clear. And if you think about it, I personally cannot fathom how I could be so caught up in my belief system that I would be willing to strap on a vest of explosives and drive someplace and blow myself up with a whole bunch of people and think I was doing a good thing. Think about that. That is really that's a strongly held belief.
Yeah.
On the other hand, if you start to learn how to perceive through the soul-centered eyes of the authentic self, you don't divide things into right and wrong. There is no perceptual filter. You just see what is. You don't move into judgment. All you do is you move into a process that we refer to as neutral observation. And this is why we said this morning, it turns out in the trios, the neutral observer role turns out to be the most important one over time. Because it's training in how to simply see what is, without having to do anything with it in your consciousness. So you simply see what is. When you do that, you find that you're in a place of acceptance, you're in a place of compassion, peace, equanimity. And then if you decide to turn that into an action, what you will do is a very interesting process. You'll do a process called evaluation. Evaluation has the word value in it. So you will look to see what you perceive has the greatest value, and then you'll go and you'll do that. So you will look for the value in everything that you do. It's a much, happier way to go through life, and much clearer. So you're not basing decisions on predisposed ideas that may or may not have any validity. You decide in the moment. If you're Roy March, you decide you're going to go out and help those people. Why? Because you want to help those people? Primarily? Not really. You want to know what the primary reason is? And Roy, you correct me if I'm wrong. I feel so good in my heart when I do that. It's a whole different way of being in the world. So, when we work with this, the thing that we can really apply ourselves and learn how to work is in this whole area of judgment. Because when we're dealing in judgment, we're dealing in the whole thing about right and wrong. And anytime you're dealing in right and wrong, you will always have a negative emotional consequence that goes with it. What's the negative emotional consequence? Whatever the upset is you feel inside, that stems immediately from holding that position. So that's what we're going to be taking a look at here. And would you think that judgment fosters or detracts from your sense of well-being? I know, I can hear you. It's an obvious question. So let's explore this a little more deeply before we go into our trio. So the way that we work with this, and I'll just take a random survey. How many people ever find themselves in this position? Anybody ever find themselves doing this? Come on, all the hands should be up. I'm upset because you did this, you did this, you did this. What's the definition of an upset? Anything that disturbs your peace. I'm sorry, a lot of sacred cows are going to have to go. Anything that disturbs your peace. And we really mean anything, no exceptions. If something happens and you find it disturbing to your peace, that's an upset. We call upsets unresolved issues. We become aware of our unresolved issues mostly through our emotions. People who tend to be highly mental and have a challenge getting into their emotions have a trouble with this. They've walled off that part. They don't feel that emotion. Not a bad thing, just different people are different. So really, what are emotional reactions? They are simply physiological responses in accordance with our thoughts and perceptions. Very important to really start to get that. Next time you're feeling upset about something, rather than blaming it on the other person, you might just find yourself, gee, what is it inside of me that's making that wrong? And is there something I can do about that? This is why spiritual psychology, in the form we're doing it now, it's a 10-month program. This isn't something you hear once. I mean, maybe some people do get it that way. Not me. It took me years. This is not something that we get easily. When we're perceiving with neutral observation, we're accepting, we're peaceful, and we simply move into a process of evaluation. You're going to have a lot more peace in life in all of the pillars that Gina is talking about here of well-being, the more that you can move into this place that we're talking about. Now, as I said earlier, the good news is that the mental realm is the easiest to work with because you do have dominion over what you choose to think. The key, of course, is surfacing these underlying limiting interpretations and choose new ones. You can really do that. That's what we're going to play with here this afternoon. So let's turn our chairs into standard trio format.
So this process is freeing yourself from limiting beliefs and perceptions. And we have a quote from Deepak Chopra to begin. Once you realize that the world is your own projection, you will be free of it, a guru told his followers. Everything existing around you is painted on the screen of your consciousness. The picture you see may be ugly or beautiful, but in either case, you are not bound by it. Rest assured, there is no one who has forced it upon you. You are trapped only because of your habit of mistaking the imaginary for the real. So to begin, center yourself in your authentic self, in that place of unconditional love, of peace, of joy, and aliveness, and acknowledge the authentic self within your partner. Within the overall context of well-being, encompassing the 5 pillars of purpose, social, community, financial, and physical, invite your partner to respond to the following questions one at a time. Briefly describe a recent situation in one of the 5 areas of well-being that triggered a negative emotional reaction inside of you. What happened? How did you feel? What did you do? So in other words, you're looking for an experience in your life where something happened and you felt upset. You felt disturbed emotionally. Then, assuming the premise that underlying every feeling is a mental perception or belief, what were your perceptions or beliefs associated with this situation? And we have some clues. What should X have done differently? Probably somebody else in your life. What was wrong in this situation, and what would be right according to your perception or belief? Then, is there another perception or belief you could choose to hold that you anticipate would result in a more positive feeling? If so, what is it?
So let me give you a clue. That will be the key point in the whole exercise, because you're challenging yourself to think of another way that's different from your habitual way of responding in that situation. So what's great about that is that you've probably never even considered the possibility of doing that. We're saying not only consider it, but say what it would be. So you're committing to nothing. Let's be really clear. You're committing to nothing. You're just giving yourself the freedom to consider another perspective you could hold if you would choose to.
What do you anticipate you'd feel if you chose this new perception? Very often you feel much more neutral, much more accepting.
So you get the idea. Well, if I felt this way in that if I perceived it this way in that situation, if I moved over and perceived that it was this, it meant that, how would I feel? How would I feel differently? That's the question you're asking yourself.
By choosing it, how do you sense your experience might be different? Could be entirely different. Go to A and identify another situation, and then you'd cycle through these various questions again. And then after you've gone through it 2 or 3 times, what are you noticing about the relationship between your perceptions and beliefs and your experience of well-being? Repeat as often as necessary.
That's the RX. It's a prescription. Repeat that as often as necessary.
And then an incredible quote from Somerset Maugham. If you don't change your beliefs, your life will be like this forever. Is that good news? I love that quote. I mean, he just really nailed it. And this really is a very simple process, but it is incredibly powerful. I was having a conversation with a grad recently who had had a dream that she was on a boogie board. Well, actually, she and her new love were on the beach with their boogie boards, and her family was seated further back on the beach. And she was reluctant to go into the water and ride the waves with her new love, with her family sitting there. And she really began to explore this very, very deeply. And what she realized was that she had a very deep misunderstanding, misperception that she hadn't been aware of, is that if her parents had been extremely successful financially, and her mother had a challenge handling that in terms of everything that went with it. And she realized that she'd internalized a belief that if she married someone extremely wealthy, that she would become a very negative and unpleasant person. This was completely outside her conscious awareness, but it was a belief system. And
Okay.
She happily let go of it, very happily.
And therefore, had a good relationship with a very well-off man,
Yeah.
which continues to this day,
Yes.
if I'm tuning in to the people you're talking about. All right, so we're going to have just a little more time in this than we did this morning, because there's a little more to it. So we'll work with a 10-5-5 format, same idea. The bells will ring at 10 minutes, let you know 5 minutes are left, and then 5 minutes for feedback. Again, feedback consists of sharing your experience and/or anything that you learned from that. Now, in this trio, of course, the listener is having a lot more to say. So the neutral observer process is really one more of coming into that awareness of that loving battery. You're just looking at what is.
So listener, you follow the handout. Very, very important to go through the steps. That will give the greatest value to you and to the sharer, and continue doing the practice of seeing the loving essence and heart-centered listening as you go through the process.
Once again, guideline, there's no advice giving in this. There's no advice giving in this. No telling them how they should perceive or how you perceive. None of that in that. We have no time for that. We're doing work in consciousness. All right, so all the trios set up, Don? Okay, here we go. So everyone, please silently center yourself in your loving. The best way you know how to do that. Just silently center yourself in your loving. And when you're ready, let's please begin.